All right, at 5:30, we can probably just wait until, or we can have Dan can join us and catch up when he gets here. I think that's okay. I'll call to order the study session for Tuesday, April 6th. Just one item, and we have probably 45 minutes before we need to shut down and let Laura prepare for our regular meeting. The topic is Quincy Farm RFP. City Manager Kramer, would you like to introduce it?
Sure. And I think, Laura, we do have a slide to just prompt us. I just want to set the table for a second on how we got here to this discussion tonight. This will just take a couple seconds. At our February 2nd study session, you might recall that City Council reviewed a first draft and provided comments. We began to work on adjusting the RFP to match Council's comments and feedback. On March 15th, though, we did get a new version of the RFP, and it had enough changes that it made sense just to run with that version. Councilor Wheel sent that in, and so we included that in the packet. And you'll notice we just thought it might be easiest to do a color version so you could see which parts were left over from before, which parts that staff had some either questions or thoughts that we thought should be included even after looking at the updated version. And then there's obviously then the new sections themselves. And I think everybody's got the same colors, right? They're all blue and pink. Is that right? I believe.
Right.
Yep. And so we did that just to make the conversation easier so that we could talk from which parts, just to clarify more than anything. It's staff's goal to have general agreement tonight on what a final version looks like, so that we can send this out in short order. And so to help with that goal, there are, I think, a couple of topics we want to just make sure all of council's on the same page with. So we just want to highlight these three questions. I think these are three things that I think we would want to make sure that we have clear direction on from City Council. And anything else that City Council wants to talk about, that's great. But again, our hope is that we can come out of here with the green light to, even if there's a few changes that we can make after tonight, send it back out to council just to confirm that it works, and then we could send it out. So that is our goal tonight. Councilor Wheel, Mayor Stewart, I know you both had a chance to work on the updated version quite a bit. I'll turn it over to you guys to maybe just talk about an overview of the version that you sent in.
Sure. If you don't mind, Mayor.
Please.
Okay. I'll be very brief because I think I've had more than my share of say, but I think the objective was to really simplify and not to guide or lead the applicants, give them the opportunity to be creative and come up with a variety of different ideas. So I think I would prefer to listen rather than talk. I do think there are a couple of minor issues that I'd appreciate a little bit of feedback on. The title about including the word activation, I'm not sure what that would say to a potential applicant. So I'm not too crazy about adding that in. And I think to Chris's point, we would have a small amount of surgery if we decided to go with the open space approval later after the RFP was done, rather than as a prerequisite. There's some language in there that calls it out as a prerequisite. And I can understand why it should be a prerequisite, but I also don't know what the patience level for Colorado open lands would be if they had a number of different folks come to them with the same with a project for the same piece of land. So we might be better off vetting that after the fact. Make it a contingency for sure, but I don't know that we'd have to require the approval up front. That's all I had to say. Russell?
No, I'll hear from other council members. I know anybody wishes to jump in first. Councilor Gallagher, Councilor Safavi, anybody?
This is Councilor Blum.
Councilor Blum.
Let me address a couple of issues. I like what Randy has done here. I've got two issues because I almost think we need to do a request for qualifications rather than a request for proposal. But I think this works. But I've got two things that I object to. If you go to page 3, there's 2 number 9s in there, page 3.
Oh, okay.
And it says the extent to which proposal describes plans for ownership. My concern is that we maintain, Cherry Hills maintains ownership of this throughout the duration. And I'm not willing to vote for transfer of ownership. So in that first number 9, I would change it to describe plans for continuous ownership by the city. That's my first comment. And then if you go to page 6, I would take out the last 2 paragraphs on page 6, talking about transfer title, because I don't know how the rest of council feels about it, but I think it's important that we maintain ownership. We request these proposals really for, you call it management or activation. I think that's great, but I think one of the concerns I've got is I do not want to lay out the possibility that we may transfer ownership. So I'll leave that open for discussion. But other than that, I like the Exhibit B that was put together by you guys. And that's my comments.
Others, Councilor Safavi or Councilor Gallagher.
Let me jump in since Al, you brought up a question. I guess I have a question for your recommendation. First, I really like the direction this is going. Shorter, much easier to understand. I like what, thank you, Randy, for again, spending time doing this. Al, let me ask you a question. If we are not, I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the previous discussion was that we transfer ownership, but it is, if whoever takes charge, they do not meet certain expectations or criterias in the future, we have the right to take the property back. That's what I thought the discussion was before. Now what I'm hearing is that, well, not give them the ownership. I'm not saying right or wrong. It's just that this is different than I think the conversation we had before. And then if we don't give them ownership, is it that we're going to get less applicants or qualified applicants, better applicants? I don't know what the impact would be. So that's sort of a question for the team here. Back to you.
Yeah, my concern, option. I appreciate those comments because I think I brought up the possibility of a right of reverter if it didn't follow the path that we want to go about. But the more I talked about, the more I've talked to other people, other constituents. It seems to me that we have an asset there, and I want to maintain ownership of that asset. And whoever can come in with a maintenance or a management plan that can meet all of our goals, I don't see any necessity they have to have ownership of the property. And that's why I don't know how the other council members feel, but my concern now is I do not want to give up title, even with a right of reverter. So that's in essence where I am sitting today.
I'll jump in on that note. Al, I agree with you, and option, I think you're right that it is a slightly different conversation. Randy, first of all, thanks for putting all of this work into it, and I really appreciate what you have tried to do. And at the last meeting, when you mentioned that, you were trying to be more open-minded and thinking in a broader picture, and as I let that kind of percolate, I think I've come to the conclusion for myself that so much work has been put into this property that I don't know how truly open-minded I really am. I think I think that we are on somewhat of a path, and I don't want to go back to the drawing board. I don't want to make it seem like we're throwing out everything that has been done and starting all over. I think I liked the way the initial document was going, in that it was trying to find a partner and giving them the information that they need to say, here's in very broad strokes what we envision. How would you do that? How would you put some actual structure to that? And what would your ideas be? But to completely open it up and say, give us all new ideas. I don't know how open I really am to that. And I would hate for people to go and put a ton of work into it without, sort of that knowledge that I don't, to Al's point, I don't think I'm willing to entertain transferal of the property either. And I think people should know that. If there's a consensus around that, I think we should know that, so that people can craft their proposal, in a way that's a partnership rather than. And so along those lines, my 3 comments, I guess I'm leaning towards maybe sticking with what we had going on. I really liked your evaluation criteria section, because I think it does a really good job of saying what's going to be important to us. And I think you captured at least what I think is important in that. So I would suggest that we could try to work this in. But the concerns I have are that the way things are restated, first of all, I think a lot of important background information is excluded. I know that you're trying to make it shorter, and perhaps some of the background information that's in the original RFP, like the whole profile of Cherry Hills Village, maybe we don't need that. But I do think I really liked the Quincy Farm overview that was in the original document. The new document refers to the conservation values, but it never talks about what they are. You'd have to actually go read the conservation easement to get that. And I think the way that it's worded might not actually be accurate in some cases. And I didn't really have time to go through and check every little thing against the conservation easement. But for example, on page 4, it says the main house on the west side may be used as a nature center, replaced on the same footprint, or demolished. Those are true statements, but it can also be used as a caretaker residence. So that's not a completely accurate statement that people might be basing their proposals off of. And there are several other places where I'm not sure that the way that it's worded is 100% accurate. Another one is about the higher up on the page, the conservation easement prohibits the construction or reconstruction of any other improvement on the property unless Colorado Open Lands determines blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait, sorry. No, that wasn't the one. It was, the first sentence. The intent of the conservation easement is to maintain and preserve the grounds and structures on the farm in their existing condition. Well, I'm not positive that that is the intent, because as you further say, those buildings can be torn down. So I'm not sure that that's 100% accurate. And then there's another one under permitted uses. Uses unrelated to preservation, agriculture, and low impact recreation or natural human history of our local community are prohibited. Well, I don't know that that's true. I know it specifically talks about art classes and painting and educational purposes. So I think there are other permitted uses than just what's outlined there. So if we were to, I'm more in favor of starting with what we had and incorporating, maybe taking out some of the unnecessary background and incorporating the evaluation criteria. But if the group collectively feels that we should just move forward, you know, with this draft. I think that considerable work to make sure that every statement in here about the conservation easement is accurate and not misleading would be important. Because I don't want to give anybody making a proposal, you know, a false constraints or not communicate the constraints accurately to them either.
Katie, would you be okay if we, you've got a series of appendices that are attached to the RFP. Would it be okay if we, now certainly if we have a factual error, we should clean it up, absolutely. For the elaboration part, I'm wondering if we could make some references to, we've got, you know, visioning committee report, we've got Quincy Farm master plan, we've got the conservation easement, you know, and stuff like that. I wonder if we could keep the size down and yet have, you know, kind of the firm legal footing that we have not misstated by referring folks back to the attachments.
Yeah, I mean, so what I could see, generally speaking, if I start with the original document, if we get rid of the Cherry Hills Village profile information, that's most of the first page. Go back to this Quincy Farm overview, which I think is just a little more thorough. So for example, the new document refers to the life estate. Well, but you never explained that there even was a life estate, and this doesn't talk about leases, that anybody's occupying the buildings currently. It doesn't. So I think if we keep this Quincy Farm overview, and I like the map to give people an idea, you know, they don't know where this property is or what it looks like. And I like the original section about the conservation easement. I think it says a lot of the same things, but doesn't make as many statements that I think are a little misleading or not quite accurate. The National Historic Register part is almost identical. I like the existing. I feel like you could keep this whole section, and I like the prior work completed section. What this says to me, as somebody who wants to put a proposal together, is a lot of work has been done here, and I need to go familiarize myself with all of that. And I'm not going to propose that I have to come in and start from the beginning and do all of this work. I know that there's something that I can build on, and I don't have to start from scratch. I think we could potentially replace the section 2.0 goals that I know we really struggled with. Perhaps we remove those and replace that with your list of criteria that you came up with. Because I think even though they're worded, even though they're called something different, your criteria really does enumerate what we're going to be looking for, what we're looking for in every proposal, the ones that our volunteers have put together and the ones we'd look for from anybody else. And then, you know, the details about the actual proposal, I'm pretty flexible about, you know, what exactly would be included in all of that. I know, as Al has said, qualifications. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm flexible on making some changes to what's included in the actual proposal itself, but that's kind of what I would propose is.
Okay. Yeah.
My comments would be
Good input. Thanks.
Councilor Gallagher.
Yeah, my comments would be a couple, just to, Al, to address your point about keeping ownership. I think this is an opportunity to really flesh things out, and and leave that as an opportunity. It's not a criteria as such. And I think Kathy's well-chosen words in that paragraph, those last two paragraphs on page 6, if they do go off the rails, we can, we have a take back mechanism. And Randy, I think your work is really good, and I appreciate the staff's in trying to integrate these two. I think the result is, Katie, I'm more inclined to, I hate to go back. I'm more inclined to move forward with this combination proposal or request for proposal, and I think I'm echoing the group in that the evaluation criteria they're spot on, and they don't tie you down. They just ask the question to the extent of, and so it does not. You could say we're not going to address that. That's the extent that we're going to deal with this. So it leaves it wide open for the applicant. I think the thing that really catches me is when these things come back, we're going to have things all over the board. And what are the criteria? You can't use traditional criteria, traditional point systems, just because we've got so many different types of proposals that are potentially coming in. So it would be sort of that classic, weighted. How do you weight something and give it a point system and come up with an answer? We can't use. I just don't see us being able to use that kind of criteria. End of comments.
Councilor Sheldon. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Sorry I missed you at the last meeting. Mike, I just heard you say when these come back, as in when we get the proposals in from proposers. And I've heard a lot of you speak as if we're going to be receiving what could be a whole mess of proposals. I'm not near as confident that we're going to be getting a whole mess of proposals. I think this is a very unique opportunity, asset, liability, call it whatever you want to call it. But I'm not confident that we're going to have 6 to choose from, or even 3 necessarily to choose from. So I think I'm going to say the following statement, but not wanting to take away from any of the work that Randy, that you've put into this, or anyone else. I think we may be overthinking this just a little bit. We maybe just need to get the thing out there and see if anyone's even interested. We may not get any. I don't know, but unless any of you know of anybody, lurking in the dark, trying, getting ready to propose on it. But some of my other comments regarding transfer of ownership, I believe that we will likely take a very small pool and make it even smaller if we don't at least offer that as an opportunity. I worry about that. I worry that somebody, I'm going to go ahead and use Natalie Anderson as an example. I don't know that she would do this without getting the ownership. And I'm not saying she's going to be a proposer on it anymore. But if there's somebody out there who thinks that they're getting the golden goose here because they're getting ownership of the deal, if we were to strike that out of the request for proposals, I believe that we would be losing that potential person or group. And I fear that with a small group to begin with, if we take that option out of there, we may not have a whole lot to review when they come back. So I would prefer to keep the option in there as written. I think, Mike, you referenced it on Kathy's comment on page 6. Or I think, I don't know whose insertion it was, but I think we should keep the optionality of it in there and offer it up, but don't make it a requirement, but don't prohibit it either. That would be my recommendation. I think we also need to think about the flip side. If we don't deed it to a proposer, so we strike a management and activation agreement, or whatever we're calling, whatever our agreement ends up being called. We strike some deal with some entity, and they do flop, and we do exercise one of our take back rights. We're going to be back in the same position again, where the city owns this asset and again doesn't have necessarily the wherewithal or desire to manage and maintain it. So I want to keep in mind, we're talking about having that clawback or that reversion right if we do offer ownership. We just got to be careful what we wish for. We don't want somebody we don't want to set this up and make it really hard for them. And if they fail, we're all going to be sitting here having this conversation, or our successors are going to be having this conversation in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I guess finally, I am also inclined to proceed with the version that Randy has updated here, as opposed to reverting back to the original document. Thank you.
Mayor, can I add one more thing here?
Yes, of course, Councilor Savati.
Look, I mean, there are a couple of things that Randy said that, Dan said that resonates well with me. One is don't overthink it. Actually, before he said it, I was thinking about that. Are we overthinking this? So the idea here, I think, look, the reality is what we need to put out there is a combination of what we put previously and what Randy nicely put together. One thing that I think, Katie brought up some of the things that we need to check, the facts that we need to check in Randy's version. Obviously, if there are some things that need to be modified to make sure they're correct, they can be double checked. I don't know who proposed it. Maybe it was Randy, or maybe that some of the details that that Mayor Pro Tem is mentioning, maybe we can't put those in appendix, so we don't lose them. So I like that idea, but I really think that, again, going back to I think if we don't overthink it, we just make some modification, check for accuracy of what Randy has here, give the I think we have a version here that we can work with and move forward. And again, the idea of going back to what Dan said, let's just put it out there. As long as our document is accurate, it might not be 100%, but will never be 100%. It might be 98%. Let's put it out there. Let's see what kind of interest we get. If it's 20, awesome. If it's 2, so let's just see what we get. So anyway, with that being said, back to you.
Mayor, this is Al again.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilor Blum, go ahead.
A couple things real quick. One is I do agree with Dan that there is a potential we may get fewer, if any, proposals. But again, as far as my concern about putting in there that we may convey title, whoever's going to come in with some type of management or activation proposal, I question their motivation in getting title. It seems to me this whole thing can be done without giving up title. But again, that's my concern on that. I tend to agree with Dan that there may be very few people that we get proposals on. And I do agree that Randy's, with some of the corrections that have to be done, I would be in favor of his proposal along the lines of keeping things simple that we've talked about before. So that's the end of my comments.
Thank you. Good comments, everybody.
I have one more thing then. If we're going to move forward with the Randy's version, I mentioned several things, and I'll send over all of the concerns I have, but I also have a question. On the very first page, there's a sentence that says, respondents must anticipate that all plans for preservation, maintenance, repair, operation, and programming will be secured from private funding sources. I don't know that we've ever decided that we've said we're not going to contribute anything as the city. I don't know that I have ever said that. I feel like there's a possibility of some contribution from the city.
There also could be some other resources. I don't know if a foundation's eligible for grants or whatever, but that would maybe rule that out. So you're right, Katie, that should be amended, that sentence.
I think that's a good point, Katie. You know, if someone wants to come in with a plan that says, hey, the city gives us $1 million, you know, $5 million, that's fine, you know, fine. We can evaluate it like we can all the others.
Yeah, or if they say you're going to give, you know, you're going to keep mowing the grass and trimming the trees.
Yeah.
We're going to do everything else, right? Or so, I don't know.
I think that's probably appropriate. I can add my few comments. I think these are all great comments. I think I agree with the way this is all going with Randy. I agree with Councilor Sheldon's comments almost verbatim. I don't think we're going to get a lot of responses here because this is a big obligation. Who's ever going to do this, if they are going to spend their own money, this is a huge obligation. So this is a very different kind of RFP. I'm hopeful that we get any responses. Obviously, there's the Cherry Hills Land Preserve that's already publicly said that they want to respond. So they would be one. You know, I don't think that we should eliminate the possibility that Cherry Hills Land Preserve takes title to this property if they want to do that. I mean, that may be something we want to evaluate. That may be a solution that's a win-win for everybody. So I wouldn't eliminate the possibility now of transferring title. We can always evaluate that on the back end when we have the responses, and we can always, as a council, then say, no, that's not what we want to do. But I don't think we should eliminate that potential for the Nature Conservancy or some other group. I mean, who knows where this all may go, or who may want to bid it, and what they might want to do with the title. With the title comes a lot of obligations, obviously, but it also comes with some freedom of operation for them to determine what they want to do in the preservation of the property. And they would be answering then to Carl Open Lands. Along with the title comes the obligation to Carl Open Lands. So that's the bottom line. If somebody wants to take that in, I don't think we as a council ought to say no before we even send out the RFP. I mean, that would require in-depth discussion after we get any proposals in. So if we get any proposals in, as Councilor Sheldon.
Yeah. So, sorry, Mayor, did I interrupt you, or are you finished?
No, I'm done. You go ahead, Dan. You have
okay. So I just wanted to address one thing, Al, that you just said a few moments ago about questioning their motives if they want the ownership. I got to tell you, if I were a foundation or some kind of nonprofit, I don't think there's a scenario where I wouldn't want the title to the ground. If I'm going to be investing 6 or 7 figures into a project, potentially on an annual basis, I would want title. I just don't see that the upside for me as the proposer to not have title, and I see lots of downside to not having title. So anyway, I think I don't think the questioning of motives is necessarily there. We'll obviously have to scrutinize and underwrite somebody if they do come in, and we have one or more suggesting title is not necessary, and one or more suggesting title is necessary in order to take their deal. We'll have to obviously look at that and make sure that, you know, that somebody who wants to take title is the real deal and that their motives are genuine. But I appreciate what you're saying. I just disagree with it. And I think we'll find more people. The bucket might get a little bit bigger, maybe go from 0 to 1 if we offer title.
You may be right. Councilor Wheel.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Dan. I wonder, because I'm asking myself that I'm taking a certain amount of solace in this right of reversion. And I don't really know how easy or difficult that is, whether we end up, you know, in situations like this, it becomes years of dragged out court battles or just what? Difficult to prove that they didn't live up to the commitments, you know, how difficult and so on. There are people on this phone call on the council who know more about this stuff than I do. And I thought I'd throw that out there and ask as a question.
Maybe City Attorney, if you'd like to jump in on that. I do think it's certainly possible. You want to give us your thoughts?
Transferring title?
Yeah, just
Getting it back.
Getting it back.
Getting it back. Oh, it's possible. You can draft all kinds of rights of reverters. It's a matter of, actually, the hard part is figuring out what conditions you want to impose and what the triggers are and making them clear enough so that it's patently obvious and that there's really no room for dispute, as opposed to vague aspirational goals that lead you in the bleak house of litigation. So that's really the trick, is figuring it out and drafting it. That they happen all the time, but everyone's a little different, I think.
Yeah, you could make some metrics that involve hard dollars or something.
Yeah, you can
spend this amount of money. Unless you spend that amount, you're meet those criteria and show us that you did it. I don't know.
Or put money in escrow and perform improvements up to a certain standard. I mean, it's really so broad as to be not helpful.
Well, I actually like that idea of some kind of financial obligation, because my concern is, if you think back to when we were sitting around in exec sessions talking about these bigger picture issues, we talked about this right of reversion, and the right of reversion at the time we were talking about it was going to be exercised only in the event that there was a crack in the conservation easement. That's my recollection. That's how we started the conversation. We said, if an applicant comes in, takes title, and then decides to go try to break the conservation easement so that the site could be subdivided or some other use could occur, then we click in the right of reversion. But now, after thinking this through for the last several months, I think we want some milestones. I mean, just them not cracking the conservation easement isn't enough.
No.
We need to know that they're not going to let the weeds grow to 10 feet high and stop irrigating everything and let the houses go to pot. And I mean, there needs to be some level or some criteria of maintenance that we need to ensure.
Question.
And programming, and some level of programming too, right? I think that's the goal here. Unfortunately, we don't actually outline that criteria for what exact kind of programming expectation we have in this. But I think at some point, as we get further in, hopefully we're working in a collaborative way with the group that's selected on trying to figure out what that menu of programming may look like.
Well, if I could just jump in, Councilor Sheldon, those points are all things that would be part of a management agreement too, for that matter, right? At least touching on all those areas. So it's probably a useful exercise for everybody to start thinking, next steps, whether that pertains to the RFP tonight is a different story, right? But thinking through all the things that you would want, all the standards you'd want to establish, and milestones and performance criteria, et cetera.
Oh, it's mind-boggling. I mean,
Yeah, there's also the possibility that the city could be an enforcer of the conservation easement along with Carl Openlands. I mean, you could partner with them. So there's that as well. But I think, Carl Openlands, I think, is going to be pretty vigorous in enforcing it has been already, in enforcing its easement terms and willing to litigate. But that's another approach as well, an additional approach, not. You want me to kind of sum up? I think we kind of have a direction here about.
I think Chris had something.
You want me to sum up, or Chris, do you want to sum up? You want me to
Yeah, just I will say that on the reverter clause itself, the good news is I don't think we have to solve that or create those criteria for the RFP. So, in hopes of keeping it so that it's not so overwhelming, I think we have time to kind of to circle that up. Mayor, I do have, in an effort to get a revised document out to council, can I go through just a couple of clarifying questions to make sure we're hitting the mark?
Sure, or maybe a process, Chris, instead of doing it here, since I'm hearing a lot of things from Councilor Brown too, that maybe a process of getting together with Councilor Brown and Councilor Wheel and looking at or having her send some of these things to you and then making those changes may be the way to go, rather than trying to work it out here. I think, and I think that's an excellent point. I think we should be accurate here. And I think I've taken notes, but adding some of the provisions that, like Councilor Savabi said, always cite, hey, rely on the conservation easement, but here, but here is our, a summary of it, or kind of, a synopsis of it. And then having some of Councilor Brown's changes to that sentence about payment too, I think is a good one. I'm on board, I believe with Councilor Wheel, that activation really doesn't necessarily encompass what we're trying to do here. I mean, I think the real goal of the conservation easement is to preserve the property. I think that, programming, if to the extent there is programming, those proposals that come in with the best programming ideas are going to rise to the top, I think, in my book. But I'm not sure that activation is really the word we're really kind of searching for here. So,
well,
but
and
I
that's
think,
fine.
yeah.
I think actually maybe a joint call or meeting with Mayor Pro Tem Brown and Councilor Wheel sounds great, actually.
Mm.
There are maybe 2 or 3 bigger picture issues, if I could just throw them on the table.
Sure.
They're already been broached. I'm not bringing up anything new, but I just want to see if there's consensus so that we can move forward. There was the discussion of the criteria, the evaluation criteria. Not talking about Councilor Blum's specific one about the first number 9. More about the idea of, the presence of are these evaluation criteria hitting the mark for city council? That's really all I want.
I think so. I think there's a consensus that they do.
Yes.
Perfect. Any feedback on Kathy's question on page 6, the highlighted version with the comments?
Well, and I think it was, let's see, I gotta get there. The comment is pointing to some language on transfer of title, but it's really the language up above and some language below that section. One is just reserving the right to, very broad rights for the city in regards to the RFP. No expectation of a contractual relationship. City not responsible for any oral representations, instructions, or interpretations. So that section, and then the section following the comment box, which is a brief allusion to the Colorado Open Records Act in terms of if there's any proprietary or confidential information. I think it's helpful to put folks on notice that if there is anything in there that we are subject to an Open Records Act request, and we can only protect it to the extent that is legally permissible. So if anybody had any objections to any of that, would sure like to know.
And I guess that dovetails into the last thing I had, Mr. Mayor. There was some good discussion tonight regarding the willingness of the city to transfer title based on a proposal. And I'm not picking sides here, but I did hear sort of more weight, more momentum in the side of not excluding proposals that might consider that. But I wanted to confirm that there was not a fatal flaw there before all of council saw that included and then getting upset that we weren't taking good direction. So,
well, Chris, I was the one who brought it up, and after listening to fellow council members, if we want to leave that in there, I don't have an objection to it, but my position clearly has been stated that I do not foresee transferring titles at any point. But to leave it in, if it's going to create possibly 1 or 2 more proposals, go ahead and leave it in.
So it's a criteria that you would certainly individually consider as something that would sway you on a proposal or not, but you're not necessarily saying it needs to be a prerequisite of the RFP.
Correct. That's correct, Chris.
All right. Kathy, Jay, Emily, the team, the staff team, am I missing anything that we need to make sure that we hit so that we can work with Randy and Katie on an updated version?
There is a section on management plan for property acceptable to Colorado open lands.
Yes, and especially related to the timing of that. We wanted to make sure that it was clear that that's required, but I will just go ahead and, this is a policy discussion here tonight. However, I will say from an administrative perspective and dealing with these proposals as they come in, and also maintaining a good relationship with Colorado Open Lands, my recommendation would be to clearly state when it's required, but have that be further down the road. Requiring that before the submittal, again, I think does nothing but discourage submittals And our goal is to encourage submittals. So let's be clear, they got to get it. And let's tell them at what stage in the process, but not required as a prerequisite.
I think that's exactly right. I think you have
Yeah.
consensus there.
Okay.
I'd like to suggest one more thing. For full transparency, would it not be smart for us to reach out to Colorado Open Lands now and just notify them of the process that we're going through and what we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, and we've had some of those conversations at a staff level already about
Okay.
trying to make sure, what is the right time to fold them in. Yes, I think we're going to be especially sensitive to that, Councilor Sheldon. Absolutely.
Okay. Our Open Lands knows from last fall about the potential of an RFP. So, but they haven't, there have been no recent communications with them, but obviously they're going to be very interested in seeing the RFP.
Yes.
Too, so.
Yes, very much so.
City Attorney.
Chris, I just, I and members of council, I did hear some comments about some things from the last version, including the overview and the work completed. Maybe
Yes.
map being of value, but
That was the part, I guess, I'm hoping that maybe Randy,
Katie and Randy, if that's
and
delegated, I wasn't sure if that.
sit together and kind of go through those to make sure that we're keeping it short enough, but also including enough context.
Or is it the conversation, Katie, you, Laura does such an excellent job transcribing our dialogue. Can we get that as preparation? I've taken notes, but they're not complete. So I wonder if we can get that as a background document so we capture the thoughts from council. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I'm going to, Laura's on this call. I'm going to ask her to maybe.
Defer that to Laura.
Yeah, sorry, this is Emily. It's a study session, so Laura doesn't usually do minutes for these, is my understanding.
Understood, but we could do a summary document that highlights the topics discussed and especially the points that are still needing to be sort of addressed, if you will.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be in elegant prose, just bullet points so that we capture.
Sure, yes, I can work on that.
Excellent.
Laura, I was gonna volunteer myself, so maybe we can work together
Well,
because I have a lot of notes already.
And Katie and Randy, we will help coordinate the meeting with you guys as well. If you don't mind, we'd like to sit in, so that we're getting the information directly, but also so that in case you guys had any questions, we can provide that to you also. So
No, I think that's fine.
I mean, just one interesting thing to note, I know we're trying to simplify and make it shorter. The original document, pages 1 and 2 are just the cover page and the blank back. Pages, you're talking about 3 sheets of paper, double-sided, one whole side of which is a map. And then the whole rest of it was just all the, what needs to be included in the proposal and how to do the submission and where to direct your inquiries. So in terms of the content and the requirements, they're about the same length. It's really, it was really only 3 pages back and front, one of which is a map. So I don't know if we've really shortened it significantly, but
I'm going only on a subjective basis, but when I went to print, my printer just kept going and going and going. And I thought we were like 28 pages or something.
no, it's 16.
16, well, maybe I miscounted.
Maybe there was a lot of document or extra, like the attachments or something, but it was 16 pages, and page 8 starts with the proposal and all the stuff that has to be included in your proposal, which we have, totally cut out. And the standard terms and conditions takes up 4 pages, 5 pages. So, you know, if we don't feel like any of that stuff is necessary, but anyway,
Well,
I
anyway,
think
we do need to get going, and we will. I think the process is in place now. I think that's good. I think that the idea is we're going to go forward with the version that Randy had, and if there are changes that need to be made to that, let's make them on Randy's and add anything that we want from the first version if you think is necessary, Councilor Brown. Make any corrections to it, and then we can get that done that way, and then get it out. We do need probably to sign off here pretty soon so we can let Laura prepare for the regular meeting. Is there anything else that needs to be said before we close out the study session? All right. Well, thanks everybody for a good discussion, and we can all take a break and let Laura get ready for the study session then. And we do have, it's a light agenda, but we do have DA John Kellner to speak, and he'll be speaking first, so we won't make him wait. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, John. This is Laura. You want to check your audio?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yep. Everyone will be coming in back in a few minutes here to get the regular meeting started.
Okay. Does it start at 6:30?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We have a little bit.
Great. I'll be back in a few minutes then.
Okay. Great. Hi, Michelle. Oh, you're muted. I mean, you're.
Hi, Laura.
Are you still on the phone? Do you want to hang up your?
Give me a second.
Okay.
Did that help, Laura?
Yes, I'm not hearing the echo anymore.
I'll try it this way. If I have to go back to my phone, you'll know that I goofed again.
Okay.
What's that? Well, that's the same guy, right? We got Bible. Oh, I gotta go back to it.
I have 6:30. Are we ready to go, Laura?
Yes, we are ready.
All right. I will call to order the meeting of the Cherry Hills Village City Council for Tuesday, April 6, 2021. It is 6:30. Laura, could we have a roll call of members, please?
Counselor Safavi,
Here.
Counselor Wheel? Randy, you're muted still.
I'm still glad to be here.
Counselor Brown? Counselor Gallagher?
Here.
Counselor Sheldon?
Here.
Counselor Blum?
Here.
All right, so we have full attendance, and good evening, Mr. Kellner, Mr. District Attorney. Good to have you with us.
Hey, Mayor. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you join us. We really appreciate taking the time out to talk to us about the DA's office and Cherry Hills Village and Arapahoe County and the 18th Judicial District. I know I had a few things that I gave you suggested for agenda items, and I'll just pass it over to you then and let you riff if you like.
All right, I'll take the mic then. Appreciate it, Mayor Stewart. Thanks everybody for giving me some time. I appreciate that you set aside an hour for me to talk about everything from the DA's office, and I promise I will use that full hour. In all seriousness, I was on a panel last night with a Centennial City Council, and it went the better part of 2 hours. So in any event, let's go ahead and talk about the DA's office. So for those of you that I have not met, I just wanted to introduce myself. I was sworn in as the DA on January 12th of this year. Before being fortunate enough to be elected, I was a Chief Deputy District Attorney in the 18th. And for those of you that may not know the contours of the 18th, that is, of course, Arapahoe County, but it also includes Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln. So that makes us pretty unique. We are an incredibly diverse judicial district with nearly 1.1 million people. And I would say, once we get the census back in this year, probably more than that, probably 1.2 plus, which makes us the most populous judicial district in the state by far, more than Denver, more than El Paso. And not only do we have a large population and 22 plus local jurisdictions, police agencies that we work with on a routine basis, but we have a very diverse population. We've got the third largest city in the state of Colorado, in Aurora, which is an incredibly diverse place, probably the most diverse outside of Brooklyn. We've got most of Aurora. For those that don't know, we stopped that dividing line right at Colfax. So the northern part of Aurora is in the 17th Judicial District. But one of the interesting challenges about this job is that, it spans obviously the Denver metro area, but down into the suburbs of Douglas County, a little bit more rural in Elbert, and all the way out to places in Lincoln where there might be more cattle than people. So we get different challenges across the board. I was brought in on day one of George Brockler's administration to help start a cold case unit. We had a backlog of 250 plus cold case murders in our jurisdiction, and he wanted to put a dedicated prosecutor on that to try and work those. So I did that for several years. I was recognized as the Colorado District Attorney's Council Prosecutor of the Year for my work solving and prosecuting these old murder cases and bringing some of these people to justice on cases that we thought might have been lost to time. I also became the leader of our largest felony prosecution unit in Arapahoe, and then ultimately took over the Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln County offices. Prior to that, I was a deputy DA in Boulder County. So obviously with the events that unfolded there about 2 weeks ago, I immediately reached out to my colleague and friend, the DA there, Michael Doherty, and offered up our assistance. And I'm glad to say that we have the resources and sadly the know-how, having dealt with the Aurora Theater shooting, some expertise you don't want to have, but make available when needed. So we provided some investigative resources and victim advocacy resources to our friends in Boulder. Before that, I was a prosecutor in the United States Marine Corps. I served on active duty for 5 years, deployed overseas to Afghanistan, and continue to serve to this day as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserves. Get to spend my free time down at NORAD Northcom, sometimes get shut in the Cheyenne Mountain. That's not fun in case anybody's ever done that. And they shut the giant blast doors and lock you in there. But it's an interesting job. So I was fortunate. I grew up in a military family, joined after 9/11, but we bounced around a lot. And I ended up in Colorado kind of on a bit of a whim to go to law school for the Marine Corps. I was very fortunate to meet my future wife on day one of law school. She's a Colorado, born and raised kid here. So she wanted me to settle down once I was done with the Marine Corps and come back here. And actually, she used to work with the mayor at Faegre, which has gone through maybe 3 different iterations at this point of mergers, and now it's called Faegre Drinker, Biddle and Wreath. So that's a bit of my background as a prosecutor in a nutshell. My priorities for how we approach this job, number one is getting us out of this backlog of trials and cases that we've dealt with throughout the pandemic. It certainly wasn't the issue that I initially ran on seeking this position. Obviously, that kind of cropped up around March of last year, but we have suffered really some incredible bad statistics in terms of rising crime rates. And, I think it varies from community to community, the kinds of crime that they deal with, but across the entirety of the judicial district throughout 2019 to 2020, we saw a 30% increase in murders. We saw a 50% increase of those murders in Aurora alone. So pretty bad number there. 32% increase in attempted murders. So aggravated assaults, shootings at people. We saw a nearly 20% increase in burglary. Same thing with robbery. So the taking of somebody's property by force. And we've seen an astronomical rise in things like motor vehicle theft. And the numbers there are pretty staggering. So if you were to look at the fourth quarter of 2019 in Arapahoe County alone, we had about 850 stolen vehicles just in a 3-month span. That's bad. If you think about it, that's about 850 people who couldn't pick up their kids maybe from school, couldn't get to work that day, all kinds of terrible negative repercussions for the people who lost their transportation. In the fourth quarter of 2020, that number in Arapahoe County alone went over 1,500. So 1,500 folks losing their vehicle. And we've seen, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a restriction on a lot of our admission processes to the jail. And I want to be really clear, the sheriffs, I think, made some tough calls, and I back them up on this, but they said, listen, we can't risk having COVID spread like wildfire through the jail. So we are going to restrict, the kinds of cases that we're going to take into the jail. And they tightened it up to say it's got to be a pretty serious felony offense. And even though motor vehicle theft, for instance, or burglary are felonies, they're not, the public safety risk category, somebody charged with attempted murder or murder. So those folks were basically caught and released with a summons potentially to show up in a virtual court and then back out to do it again. So we've tried to, recognize that was an emergency measure imposed during the pandemic and hopefully not repeat that. We don't want to codify into law what we've seen in terms of these crime increases. Unfortunately, there's a bill called Senate Bill 62 that's making its way through the legislature that I fear does just that. I fear it does codify into law. Some of the procedures that sheriffs put in place as an emergency measure of who they could or could not take to the county jail. It is a measure that I personally oppose. The Colorado District Attorney's Council, which is a council of all 22 DAs across the state, of course, across the entire political spectrum, they're neutral on the bill because there are some that support it, some that are neutral on it, some that oppose it, like me. I should say that I think all the chiefs of police in the 18th Judicial District, along with all 4 sheriffs, have signed a letter saying they oppose this bill because they feel it, restricts some of the discretion that officers have to make these judgment calls on the scene about whether or not somebody should be arrested for a crime. And I agree with that. There's some other parts about that bill that are concerning to me. And one of them is that somebody could fail to appear 3 times in a case and not get a warrant for the arrest with any sort of a money bond associated with it. So essentially, they're not going to get arrested. And what that means is that somebody could fail to appear for a pretrial conference. So basically the last check-in before a jury gets brought in. They could fail to appear for that, and a judge is not going to be able to have them arrested, not going to be able to bring them in. They could fail to appear for jury selection. And again, a judge may not be able to even issue an arrest and have a bond associated with it to ensure that they get brought in to court. And I find that particularly offensive because, all of our citizens of our community who get those jury summons are expected to be there. And if they don't show up, there is potentially, a criminal consequence. Now, does that happen very often? No. But the reality is that I think citizens would take time out of their day and show up, and this sort of bill lets the accused not, with very little consequences until the 3rd time they fail to appear on a case. That's particularly troubling, as I mentioned, this backlog of cases. So we filed about, in 2019, about 32,000 cases in the judicial district. I'd say about 5,500 of those, 5,600, those are felonies. Big chunk of that is traffic cases, about 18,000. The remainder are misdemeanors. Obviously, the felony cases are cases where people can be sent to prison, misdemeanors, jail, traffic, much lower level offense. But during the pandemic, we filed about 20% less cases. I'm not good at math. I'm a Marine. It's something around 26,000 or so, 25. And you would think that with that decrease in filings, we would be in an okay shape in terms of overall trial set. The reality is that with the pandemic, court going virtual really slowed down the pace of resolving cases. And I think, a lot of defense attorneys, and this is, being a good advocate for their clients, so don't fault them for this, thought, well, I'll wait and see what happens, because the reality is that it might make a better situation or better offer for my client at a later date. So right now, we have 1,200 jury trials set in the 18th Judicial District. 1,200, I can't even really quantify for you, because that is within the next 6 months or less that those trials are set. We had, I think it is about 340 that are set in April alone through the 18th Judicial District. And about 250 of those are in Arapahoe County. So Arapahoe County is obviously our largest and most busy part of our jurisdiction. We have the capacity in the month of April to try 24 of those. So that is best case scenario with our current COVID restrictions. As you can imagine, that's created a huge bottleneck for us, because we've got to prioritize cases that involve child sex assault. We've got to prioritize the homicide and murder cases that we deal with. And I've got about 25 of those stacked up ready for trial, to make sure those folks on the most serious cases who've been waiting for well over a year for justice get the opportunity for that. That's my challenge. And I fear that something like Senate Bill 62, if it were to become law, makes that challenge even greater for us, with the provisions allowing for multiple failures to appear without any real repercussions to the accused or defendant in the case. So those are things that are on my radar that are very concerning to me. I think it's pretty obvious if you folks go on to maybe a Nextdoor app or something and you see people saying, hey, what's going on with the burglaries, what's going on with garage burglaries, break-ins in houses, and a lot of motor vehicle theft stuff. So those are problems for us. The sheriff and I are working on how we can deal with that. But to the extent you all have a voice on things like Senate Bill 62, I would urge you to oppose it. Mr. Mayor, you had asked about 2 particular cases. So one of those involves a young man named Angelo Alston. I was the primary prosecutor on that. involving an alleged home invasion break-in. And I should note, he is, of course, presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I can't talk about the specifics of, facts of a case that's pending, but I can tell you that that's set for a status conference here. I want to say it's in about 2 weeks, where that defendant has a new attorney, and we're going to figure out the next steps, which will likely be setting it for trial. That is a case that would have gone to trial, I want to say in March of last year, maybe it was April, but had been continued due to the pandemic. So, we're working through the process on all of these cases. The other one is a pretty phenomenal case, and I don't know if the chief is on here or not, but her team just did a phenomenal job in helping to solve a cold case murder involving a young lady named Sylvia Quayle, who lived in Cherry Hills Village. And this was back in August, I think it was, of 1981. So a month before I was born, even. And just incredible work to basically track down somebody, again, alleged to have committed this murder. We worked together with CBI, my office, the Cherry Hills Village Police Department, and many other partners to locate, extradite this defendant. And he is presently, his next court appearance is essentially to determine when we will have a preliminary hearing in the case. So it's very early stages of that case. And he, like any other defendant, again, presumed innocent. So those are my updates. Mayor Stewart, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Yeah, I have one. The first question to lead it off is, can you update us on the 18th Judicial District and the plans to split that into a new district? And if that means a new courthouse, how will that affect you? Where's the money going to come from?
Oh, I'm sure the state's going to pay for it, so don't sweat it. So great question. I'm trying to kind of pretend like this isn't going to happen right away, because the pandemic and the fallout from the backlog is, in my view, the alligator closest to the boat that we have to deal with. And, but it's a good point. Basically what's going to happen here in 2024 is that the 18th Judicial District is going to split. And what's going to happen is Arapahoe County will remain the 18th, but Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln will split off and become the new 23rd Judicial District. This is significant because we haven't had a new judicial district since, I want to say, the early 60s. And really, that's when the 18th was created. And as you can maybe imagine, if you were to drive down the highway in that time frame down in the Douglas County, it probably resembles more of like what Lincoln County looks like now. So there's been tremendous growth over the years. And I think the legislature rightly recognized that we've become a very, very large district that would benefit from having, two central hubs of sort of command and control. So that's going to happen over the next 4 years in terms of the divorce or breakup of the judicial district. And it's going to spring into being early 2024. There will be an election, obviously, November 2023 for the new district attorney for the 23rd. And the way I see this, it's really unprecedented since it just hasn't been done. We've not broken up a district before. There's no playbook for this. And we're incredibly intertwined, things as basic as our IT systems, our information sharing, the locations of our DAs is another big deal. We have offices in all 4 counties, and we've got a fairly large building in the Justice Center, large space in Douglas County. So there's space to make it happen. I think that already exists. So that's not going to be a big capital expenditure. There's no new courthouse involved with this. But basically figuring out how I set up all those individual public servants in the right spot so that they can succeed professionally while ensuring that no victims fall through the cracks in terms of our victim services that we provide, and ensuring that no defendants get lost in that shuffle either, because we can't abide by any due process violations along the way. So I view this as a 2-year planning process and then a 2-year execution process. But every decision I make right now is through the lens of essentially, if I'm hiring this person or if I'm moving this person or I'm promoting them into a spot, where do I expect them to be in 2024? So everything is done with that in mind. I'd like to put more sort of brain power into it, but we're still in somewhat of a crisis mode with the backlog.
Thank you very much, Dia Kilner. I'll open it up to council members. Anybody have any questions you'd like to pose? Here's your chance. Councilor Wheel.
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question. I've received a little bit of correspondence, not at all favorable, about this House bill that basically takes COVID measures and attempts to make them permanent. And I'm kind of puzzled at a time when COVID is starting to get under control to some degree. I mean, I'm looking forward and seeing some better times ahead. What's the rationale for making COVID measures permanent?
Well, Counselor, I wish I could explain that to you. I don't know the answer to that question. I would encourage you to reach out to some of the bill sponsors. I think some of them are in the jurisdiction, or at least nearby, to ask them that very question. Yeah, I think it probably stems from a good place. They say the jail numbers are down. That's a good thing. I don't want to hold people in custody that don't need to be held in custody if they're not a flight risk or not a public safety risk, while they're still presumed innocent pending a trial. That's not what I want to do. It's not what the sheriff wants to do. So I assume it comes from a good place. But I keep hearing people say things like, well, they're low-level offenses and they're not a risk to other people. I usually respond to that by saying, you might say it's just a property crime, and people say that until it's their property, in which case then it becomes very personal. And, folks want answers about why was this person, essentially let go from a crime scene before and then not arrested, and then they robbed my house or stole my car. I'm not going to have a good answer for them other than to say, you're going to have to talk to your legislator.
Well, George Lance had written a letter to Senator and Representative, and he talks about how the arrests are up. Now, jail population may be down, but that may be because we've been letting them go.
Maybe because of what? Sorry.
We've been letting them go, with the COVID measures. And some of these don't sound so trivial. In his letter, he talks about assaults with serious injury, kidnapping a child, sexual assault on a child, assaulting a first responder. And I could go on, but these don't seem trivial. And it says the bill would prohibit law enforcement from arresting individuals for these offenses.
Now, are we still talking about Senate Bill 62?
Yeah.
Okay. So
21-062.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 62, to be fair, does say that you can arrest somebody on a Victims' Rights Act crime. So, if it was a sexual assault, I would expect an arrest. If it was a kidnapping, I would expect an arrest. So, I don't want to overstate what it does and doesn't do. And to be fair, I've seen it go through some amendments and iterations here. So I'm trying to speak off of the latest thing that I've seen. But what it certainly doesn't allow a law enforcement officer to do is arrest for a class 4, 5, and 6 felony or misdemeanors unless some exceptions apply. And some of those exceptions are so stringent that I feel like they really can't reasonably be enacted by an officer on the street. So one of them is, for instance, you can make an arrest on a 4, 5, and 6 felony if the defendant indicates a clear unwillingness to cease and desist in the criminal activity. Now, I defer to Chief Tove here to answer, how does one determine if a criminal suspect will cease and desist? I mean, if they tell you they're not going to do it again, does that mean you can arrest, you can't arrest them? And I worry, to be frank, about the potential liability exposure, for an officer who makes that decision to arrest. But then let's say a judge says, well, maybe you shouldn't have. Maybe you haven't documented a clear unwillingness to cease and desist. And, now potentially there's a lawsuit under Senate Bill 217 from last year that could hold that officer and the city liable for an arrest that arguably shouldn't have happened. So I think it just puts officers in a really almost impossible situation. Hopefully that answered your question, sir.
Yeah.
Other questions for Councilor Sabat?
District Attorney Kellner, help us. Sorry.
Oh, let's go ahead. Okay.
Continue.
Or Councilor, who is speaking? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Mike, go ahead, and then I go after you, please. Go ahead, Mike.
District Attorney Kellner, help us understand the amendment process and this bill as it goes through that process. What are the chances that you're going to end up with we end up with a bill that is not one-sided and is balanced to the point that we end up with a reasonable result? And the concern is the polarity of the bill.
I don't know how to handicap that, sir, in terms of what is the likelihood that we get there. I know the District Attorney's Council, has taken a position to try and get some amendments that seem favorable. Again, don't address the issues to my satisfaction, but did move the bill in a better direction. So, I do commend the folks that are sponsors for being willing to listen to that. I know the Sheriff's Association initially was in a neutral position after negotiating a provision to ostensibly not hold officers personally liable for an arrest that was deemed to be potentially wrong. I still don't think that absolves them from liability potentially under SB 217 from last year. But nonetheless, there's been a willingness to engage in a discussion. I could tell you today, I testified at the Capitol in favor of a bill that expands access to veterans treatments courts across the state. We have one in the 18th that helped set that up back in 2013. And the bill sponsors initially had a draft of this bill that we opposed, we thought was very bad. But they were absolutely willing to listen. We sat down and we crafted a whole new bill, and it passed unanimously out of the House Judiciary Committee today. So it seems to have a good chance. And, we do those sorts of things to show folks that we want to approach these issues in good faith and hopefully come to the best possible bill. So I guess all I can say is we're going to keep working on that with the sponsors and make sure they understand our concerns. And, if you folks do the same, I think that helps raise the importance level for them to hear our voice.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I go?
Yes, Councilor Sabati, please.
First of all, thank you, John, for making your time to come and talk to us. Quick question here, maybe give you a little scenario. So in the past, probably a year and a half, I've called 911 in excess of 20 times reporting vandalism and issues with homeless on various properties. I was chased a good 50 feet with a butcher knife, a homeless man chasing with a butcher knife.
Wow.
The list goes on and on. Vandalism, you name it. Everything recorded on a camera. I've had probably police shows up about 7 or 8 times on these properties, take notes. It's just, tent set up around my properties for weeks and weeks, yet the city comes and tells me to make sure you plow the snow, but there's nothing else I can do about the about, all the mess that is left. So I'm trying to understand. And by the way, the folks, the homeless, when you ask them nicely if they can move or whatever that, if they can, they clearly tell you that there's nothing you can do. There is nothing police can do because the jails are full of people with, they don't want to take COVID in the jail. They explained that to you. They know the laws better than probably anybody else. So I'm trying to understand, on one hand, our area is one of the fastest growing areas, economically doing really well. I think a lot of the local governments trying to attract, high-end companies to this area. On the other hand, when you bring them and show them a building with all the mess around it, it's a turnoff. So I'm trying to understand, and I know it's not, just somebody, just doing the magic wand and everything's taken care of. It involves, there's so many factors that come into this problem. But are there any bills? Are there any solution? Are there any proposals that you are aware of that is being worked on to come up and deal with this, which I consider a serious issue, for what is happening in the area?
Yeah, that's a good question, Counselor. I'm not familiar with any bills that especially deal with the homeless issue. Having spent some time at the Capitol today, as I mentioned earlier, testifying, it's difficult to see a beautiful city like Denver, with tents all over the sidewalk areas. And you drive by and you see that nobody wants to park in the meters next to them because they're worried that something's going to happen to their car potentially, or it's in a place where they just don't feel safe. So unfortunately, it's a little bit outside my realm in terms of the bills that I track. I'm looking at things especially related to Title 18 and the criminal code. So I haven't seen anything specifically related to that, sir. And I guess to clarify, if there was any confusion about it in terms of 911 and how cases come to us in the DA's office, we get them referred to us from local law enforcement. We get a fair number from the Cherry Hills Village Police Department, and then any other local law enforcement that has jurisdiction in the area. So we can only prosecute the cases that get sent to us. And fortunately, I'm not really aware of specific homeless cases or cases involving people that, as you mentioned, chase you with a knife. That's frightening. I'm very sorry that happened to you. Is that, you don't have to tell me right now, but is that a case that's going on?
No, so I want to make sure I understand. So if somebody get chased by a butcher knife, but they don't get injured because they run away, that case doesn't come to you.
No, it could. It could be a menacing case potentially. Somebody threatens you with a deadly weapon. Obviously, it would come to me if the person was arrested or summoned. So if he was caught and identified and a case filing came to me where we would then file the charges, or if they got what would be called a summons, basically like a ticket that says you will report to WebEx court or you will report to court in person, then those summonses go to me if it's not a municipal case. So if it's a misdemeanor offense or a felony, then the DA's office would handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem Brown, please.
So I have a question, and I'm not really sure that I want to know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I think you said there are about 250 cases scheduled in April in Arapahoe County.
Yeah.
And that the maximum capacity is around 24 to actually, hear those cases. Mm-hmm. What happens to the rest of them?
Well, they will get continued more than likely. So every defendant, of course, has a speedy trial right. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there's the constitutional speedy trial right that's a bit more nebulous, but there's a statutory speedy right in Colorado, which is 6 months from the entry of a not guilty plea. Now, there's been some flex basically given to us by the Colorado Supreme Court, where they made some emergency type rule changes that said, well, you can continue it outside of that 6-month speedy trial range by virtue of the pandemic. The courts are closed. What are we going to do? I am concerned about what that means for us once the courts actually reopen. So, and I know the judiciary is concerned. One of the things they've requested is more funding to basically open up their senior judge program. So retired judges can come back on sort of an ad hoc basis and handle cases. They're called senior judges. Generally speaking, in my experience, it's been really hard to find a senior judge. There's just not many of them that are working. There's not a lot of funding for it. And the judiciary has asked the legislature to appropriate funds to add to that. I'm hopeful they do that because we're going to need it. The other thing that suffers, and this is unfortunate because it's bad for business, is civil cases. So judges that might handle, civil lawsuits where businesses are arguing over, money potentially. Maybe it's an eminent domain case. Maybe it's a taking because they're trying to move on with a project for public utilities, something like that. Civil cases are being pushed to the back burner. And so those are being resolved at an even slower pace. And I suspect that some of those civil judges will be temporarily assigned to handle criminal cases. And that's mildly troubling because you should know, a little bit of what's going on in terms of the criminal law background. Not to say these judges aren't incredibly smart and competent and able to do that, but I think that's really tough to pick up on the fly. So
I
the
guess
answer
it's a
is
little encouraging that they're not all just dismissed, but it's
no.
To that
No,
point, I mean, you've got all these ones that have been continued, and then at some point, that allowance for continuing it past 6 months is going to have to end. And it's when that window hits that I think it's the worst, because you've got all the ones that have to be done in 6 months, plus all the ones that should have been done in the past year that have been continued.
There was some talk about the legislature fixing speedy trial, basically giving us some more time, because that's statutory. It's based in Colorado statute. They can change that and make some exceptions for the pandemic. The reality is, I think it's going to take us 1.5 years, maybe 2 years to get out of the backlog. This is not something that gets fixed in 6 months, in my view. Yeah. So I'm hopeful those two things happen from the legislature and that we don't get to the point where we have to dismiss cases outright.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Councilor Sheldon.
Yeah, DA Kellner, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. And thank you for your service in both the 18th and to our reserves in the military. Appreciate your work. I'm just curious, from a person who doesn't know much about how the process goes through the court system, you mentioned 2 cases in particular, and I understand and appreciate that you can't speak about details to them, but I'm looking for more big picture of answers. The case with Mr. Alston has been going on now for 2.5 years, is about, I think if my math is right. And I understand that went through the whole swath of COVID. So I understand delays have been going on there. With the cold case murder and Mr. Anderson, just right at the very front end of that, what would you expect a case like that to take time-wise to get from start to fruition? For coming from a person who just knows zero about how your world works, would you educate us a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, obviously the pandemic slowed things down for, over 1 year for us. Certain defendants, I'm not going to talk about anybody specifically, but, especially, I'll just give you a general roundabout number. For a homicide case, it's going to be about 18 months from start to finish. Ideally, it would be 1 year, and just doesn't often work out that we hit that number. So how it works is, a defendant who is arrested is going to have their first appearance in court. They're going to set a bond. If it's a first degree murder, that would be a no bond hold, so they don't get out pending the trial. But it does mean the prosecution has to have another hearing to show the judge that we have enough evidence that the proof is evident, or the presumption is great that that defendant committed the crime of murder in the first degree, and they're in substantial likelihood of being convicted. So that hearing in and of itself, to hold somebody without bail, usually takes the defense a few months to get caught up and to have that hearing. The chief and I, we have a bit of the advantage because we know about the case and, on the investigation side. So we've read the reports, we know what's going on. And the defense attorneys have to get caught up on the back end. So that easily accounts for 3-4 months right there. And then once you get past that hearing, there will be another hearing set 30 to 60 days out where they will potentially enter a plea or not a plea. Usually that gets continued. So add in another 45 days. Maybe they enter a plea at that time, set out motions and trial within 6 months. Generally speaking, a murder case doesn't go on its first trial setting for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to cast blame, but there's a lot of tactical and strategic reasons why somebody might want to wait to the last minute and then move to continue. And that sets it out anywhere between 4 to 5 more months, especially because murder trials are typically 2 to 3 weeks. And so a judge has to find time on their docket that's pretty far out to say, I can take 2 to 3 weeks as opposed to handling, 3 one-week trials, which is more normal. So it's a challenge to schedule. I wish we had more, court days, but we're limited by the number of judges we have and the space in the courthouse.
Well, maybe that gets freed up if you guys break away from.
It doesn't change because the only cases we hear in Arapahoe County Courthouse are Arapahoe County cases.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Blum, you need to unmute, Al.
Al, you're still
Al,
muted.
Still muted, Al.
There you go.
There you go.
You mentioned the senior, I appreciate your sharing your time with us, DA, but you talked about the senior judge program, which does not seem to be adding a lot to the capabilities. Has there been talk in the legislature about expanding the judiciary? Obviously, we're short with the backlog. Is there any talk about expanding, creating some new judgeships?
Not that I've heard. No. I think that the goal is to bring folks out of retirement more so than expand that number. That number of judges is set by statute. So, if they do that, they're appointing people, going through a pretty lengthy process. And then, that takes months in and of itself to do the application and the review and then the vetting and then the selection by the governor. So I think once you go that step, you can't unwind it in any realistic kind of way. So I haven't heard any suggestions for that.
Thank you.
I wanted to give a chance for Chief, if you have any questions or anybody from the staff too, for DA Kellner.
I don't have any questions. I'd just like to say thanks, John. I appreciate you spending some time and answering some questions. And we have a great working relationship with you and your staff, and I appreciate it very much. So I'm sure we'll be seeing each other in the next many months with a couple of cases that we have, but we're looking forward to some good outcomes. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Always good to see you.
Yep, you too.
All right, I think that's it, John. We'll let you get to dinner with say hi to Sarah.
I will.
Okay. And thank you so much. This has really been helpful to us to know what's going on. And I can speak to council about Senate Bill 62 too a little bit more. Since now I think the Metro Mayor's Caucus, is now opposed.
Oh, okay.
So is CML. The sheriffs have flipped. They are now opposed.
Yeah.
All the police. So it's, when you get Boulder and Louisville and Parker all on the same page opposing this, you have a pretty strong consensus opposing Senate Bill 62 as it's written now. I think there's some thought that some of the things, it was an ACLU bill. This is something that ACLU has been interested in for a long time. And basically to answer some of the questions that they wanted to, they were concerned that there are people in jail that couldn't make bail that were there for, non-violent felonies and they just couldn't get out because, know, and that was the concern. There was all good intentions behind it, but the way it was written, particularly the way it was written in the first instance, was terrible. And I think the consensus now among all the mayors, unanimously, there was saying it just can't be fixed. So they're not even going to talk. They're just opposed.
Okay. Yeah, you know, about 2 years ago, might have been 3, there was a piece of legislation passed that said, listen, you have to impose the least restrictive bond conditions, and to start at the baseline of not using monetary conditions. You know, basically you don't have to post cash as, you know, bond. And we've taken that very seriously. I know judges take it extremely seriously as well. And they're following the law. I think they're imposing reasonable bonds, and usually not cash oriented. And I would encourage, you know, frankly, if you wanted to reach out to the sheriff and find out how many folks are sitting in jail on a very low cash bond, last I saw, it was almost non-existent. So I do understand the motivations of the folks that were interested in the legislation. But I don't like the way that they're going about trying to enact it.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
All right, we'll move on to on the agenda. We'll pass over audience participation because I understand, Laura, there's none, and nobody is on for reports from city boards, commissions, and committees. Item 6, consent agenda. Anybody wish to remove any item from the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. We need a roll call for Zoom.
Counselor Safavi,
Yes.
Counselor Wheel,
Yes.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher,
Yes.
Counselor Sheldon,
Yes.
Counselor Blum.
Yes.
We'll move on to item 8, unfinished business. Laura, would you like to speak to board member terms? I saw an announcement went out for one of those committees today.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stewart, members of City Council. Based on some previous council discussions, staff has advertised for Board of Adjustment and Appeals applications in the latest issue of the Crier and on the city website and social media with a deadline of April 30th. So now we're asking for 2 members of council to review those applications once they come in and make recommendations for appointment.
I think you have a volunteer with Councilor Wheel. Makes sense since he's another council member wish to?
I would do it. I did it last time. I'd be happy to do that.
Sure. Councilor
Great.
Block, they're your volunteers.
Thank you very much.
All
I
right.
had to scratch my eye, but I was hesitating for fear that might be perceived as a sign that I was volunteering. I waited until Al volunteered to scratch my eye.
You should just freeze. You have to freeze. All right. We have no new business this time. We do have, quickly, I have some reports to give you. A big deal, actually, potentially. On March 11th, our President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan, which pushes billions of dollars down to counties and cities that go bypassing the state. If you go online, you'll see that our allocation just by per capita basis would be $1.4 million. And that would be right now, the current plan is half of that amount in 60 days, and then the other half in a year from now. Lots of discussion. On March 19th, I was on a call with the National League of Cities, which talked about this. There are some caps, but they wouldn't affect us. What's really going on, though, is everybody's waiting for Treasury guidance from what's called Treasury guidance on what cities can spend this on. We really don't know. Broadband is going to be one. Certainly COVID is another, but how far that goes and what flexibility we may have in what we can spend it on is still unknown. I just got off a call this afternoon with Hickenlooper and Bennett and mayors and county commissioners, where they were getting the input from county commissioners and mayors about what they'd like to see. And And there was obviously lots of discussion. Certainly the senators were told from the county commissioners, please make this as flexible as possible because we know best what we need to spend this money on. See how far that goes. They're talking about broadband, certainly transportation, roads and bridges. Infrastructure is a big issue because there's another bill coming from Congress. President Biden and the Democrats are putting forth an infrastructure bill with gasoline tax and other taxes. So how that's going to play out with this money, or what's going to happen, isn't all that clear. But it will be a huge investment. And both Hickenlooper and Bennett said they wanted to see this money spent on things that like capital improvements, things that will last for a long time. So that leads me to think they're hoping for infrastructure, roads and bridges, and repairs of infrastructure, which would be terrific for the state. So more to come, and we'll see when the Treasury guidance comes out. We'll let everybody know. I did on the policing theme. I did have a meeting with Mark Griffin. He's going to be, I think I might have mentioned this last time. He's formed a new police foundation for our Cherry Hills Village, and he'll be coming forward with information on that probably next meeting, I think. I'm not sure. I know he's been talking to the chief. So that's all. That's good news. I think that's up and running, and really I'm ready to go. I also had a virtual lunch with Kevin Bomer of CML. We had a long discussion about Senate Bill 62, and as I mentioned to John Kellner, CML started out originally opposed unless amended. The sponsors of the bill, Senate Bill 62, then put in those amendments that CML wanted. So CML moved to a formerly opposed position, but then a lot of discussion with CML members and saying, no, we don't, now that we understand what's going on, we want to just oppose it. So CML's position officially now is opposed. The Metro Mayor's Caucus is formally opposed unanimously, and they'll be writing a letter. So, and the sheriffs, John mentioned the sheriffs came out neutral. Actually, they've switched their position. They're now opposed, and the chiefs of police are opposed. So everybody is on board with opposing it, and most people are not willing to even discuss with changes to the, with the ACLU. They just want to start again and see what happens. So it's, we'll watch it and see, but certainly we've done everything we could as a city to oppose Senate Bill 62 both in the Metro Mayor's Caucus and CML.
Russell, isn't one of the sponsors of that bill our senator?
I don't think so.
No, he's not one of the sponsors. All right.
No, he appeared in front of Jeff Bridges, and I think he spoke to the chiefs of police, I think, and he may have spoke to Greenwood Village as well. And he's the majority whip, so he's in a position to do something about it. And he's been getting a lot of input, I would say, but he's not a sponsor.
Okay, so I would just say, as we're all individual citizens as well, and you're free to express your opinion to your elected representation.
I'm sure their phones are ringing off the hook now. I haven't heard anybody, in favor of even as amended now. So on March 22nd, I had the first of 4 meetings with the Arapahoe County Sales Tax Reauthorization Committee, which is a long name for a couple of our county commissioners and some members of OSTAB, talking about how we're going to go to the ballot and voters in November for reauthorization of the sales tax that would otherwise expire in 2023. And that's used for acquisition of open space and for parks in Arapahoe County. So that's all moving ahead, and I expect that will certainly happen. Let's see, had a meeting with the Transportation and Mobility Committee of the Metro Mayor's Caucus, and that took a lot of discussion about the funding, the transportation bill that's coming through. And I think most of you probably got an email about that. Now that I think I mentioned last time that the General Assembly was going to roll out this new bill that would have a lot of spending, increased fees on, they call them fee increase, which is really a tax increase on gasoline and electric vehicles and other things. It's a $3 billion increase spending kind of bill to get to pay for transportation. Most of the money is going to go out according to the existing formula for counties and cities. So we'll be there. But if there's enough money, anything is better than it is now. So that's our own Colorado state spending on infrastructure, which we'll see. We'll see how that gets through. Certainly it's going to pass the legislature. I think it's going to have a lot of support, and we'll see how the legal challenges fall out to it. I think that's it. That's my report. Any counselors? Counselor Blum.
Yes, let me bring everybody up to date. Katie, myself, Chris, and Jessica have been meeting with the public affairs consultants. And we have a little thing you can put up on the board there, Chris. Basically, we've interviewed and talked to 3 different companies in this process. As you recall, one of the things I was pressing on was to proceed forward with an election in 2021. And the consensus after studying and learning about the process, the consensus was if we do go forward with some type of proposal on these 3 issues, these 3 tax issues we've talked about, the consensus was to go forward in 2022. From interviewing them, we learned basically it's a 2-phase process that we'd go through. One is a city-led process based upon the mayor and council to analyze and research the potential ballot questions. If everyone recalls, we had talked about a construction use tax. We talked about reallocation between 2 of the funds, and then amending and correcting, if we need to, our process on collecting sales tax. The second phase would be a process that's done really with a citizen group to go forward, to try and present the proposal, present it, advocate for it, and try and get it to a point where we can get it passed, whatever we decide to do on that. We did learn from talking to these 3 different agencies that the consultant expertise is the key to having these things pass successfully. I did talk to my wife, who was involved on council back when the South Suburban withdrawal went through, and they had a consultant on board from day 1, which was absolutely critical to get that thing passed. The recommend, and Katie can chime in anytime she wants here, we would recommend that there be an RFP to find the PA public affairs consultant sometimes this summer. I guess since it's a process, Jessica advised us that we have to go through an RFP because it'd probably be greater than $10,000. Once, if we do go forward, whatever ballot issues we decide to go forward on, I think Katie and I learned how important council participation as individuals is necessary if we're going to have this thing pass. So our expectation is that we'd advise the staff, assuming council goes along with it, to do an RFP to see if we can hire the political affairs consultant this summer. So Katie, if you want to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of what we discovered. I think no matter what the outcome of the research phase is, I think it will be valuable to either, point us in the right direction of what the sentiment of the community is and what their expectations are, and what kind of either support or resistance we might encounter. And even if the result, hopefully the result is that we determine what the right path is. But even if we determine that the path is, there's no support for any of these things, I still think that's incredibly valuable information. And I think it was what was really lacking perhaps the first time around. was an understanding of the sentiment in the community and what the potential pitfalls might be, prior to trying to move forward. So, I guess I always look at things from, what's the best outcome and what's the worst outcome. And my question going into it is, would this be wasted money if we decide to not move forward with anything because we don't think there's enough community support? And I ultimately came to the conclusion for myself that I don't think it would be. I think even if what we learn from the research is that the citizens won't support it, even that is valuable information. So, that includes polling and surveys and public meetings and things like that. We hire consultants to help with those kinds of things many times, Quincy Farm, the Public Works facility, City Hall. So I think this is just another case where we need to take that same approach.
Katie, do you mind if I jump in there real quick, just for a moment? I know that Councilor Blum talked about the fact that the consultants provided feedback to our team that consultants are very helpful and needed. I know that's akin to us relaying to all of you that water is in fact actually wet.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to say that. But I would offer to you two things that were consistent among everybody we talked to that resonated with me. First of all, whenever it is that there is going to be any kind of effort, should that happen, it's a huge commitment. And I think our organization is very lean, and we take pride in that. But for special projects like this, it can really tax the ability for us to execute a potential project like this in an effective way. And oh, by the way, it might also then affect our ability to do our day jobs. So from an administrative staff perspective, the consultants provide a real value just in time. But there's also the expertise. They know how council, what kind of questions should council be asking right now. They know how to find out what, and this is an oversimplification, but what is the will of the people? What are the people hoping to find, from local government? What are they hoping to get out of our collective efforts? And so, I would say that was a helpful insight that they provided to at least me about what a consultant would bring to the table and what kind of value it would have for not just the city, but the community as a whole.
I can add one item. Look, I think in terms of going with a consultant or not going with a consultant, that maybe there is a step in the middle. I feel like, one thing that this city has is, for good reason, actually, we're blessed to have this, a very large number of CFOs and people that know finances. These are folks that have managed multi-million-dollar to multi-billion-dollar companies. And I think we should take advantage of it. I think we should, I like this idea. I don't know who mentioned it, maybe, the citizen advisory group. We have that for a lot of different tasks and, areas, for land preserve and everything else. So why not form a citizen advisory group within our village that actually can be 4 or 5 members. These are, again, qualification would be people that they have financial background and CFO background. And look at our finances and our models, what we have put in place. We have all looked at it. We all have our opinion as how to, fill the gap, or if there is a gap, or how much the gap will be. I think that folks at the city have done a great job, projecting. But I think some of these CFOs may come up with very creative way as maybe how we can or make recommendation that none of us have thought about. So anyway, for me, the consultant is a latter stage, but I feel like we need to take advantage of what we have inside our village with some of the really good financial minded people. That's all.
Councilor, I'm going to get to everybody here. Councilor Wheel, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Chris has teed up Jessica for taking us through the financials. And I would like to go through, have all of us go through that and come to an agreement on what the situation is. I don't have an agenda particularly for this. I mean, I don't really have an agenda at all. But I think we need to have that level of conviction, because if we put too much stuff on the wagon, then I think we run the risk of breaking the wagon. So is it all necessary? Do we take it a bite at a time? You know, I'd like to see us all get on the same page, because I'm not quite ready to ride off to the races on this yet. I know there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time on it, but I would like to get myself a little more satisfied that all of this is necessary. I think with the consultant, we have a period where we can all be involved, and then we have to turn it over once it's a campaign to citizens and others to run it. We cannot be involved at that point. So it might be wise for us to pick the brains and engage benefit of consultant early in the game, just so we don't go off in a tangent, you know, go off on a tangent and set the Citizens Committee up for something that's not a good idea. So I wouldn't have a problem. I don't want to spend a ton of money, but at the same time, I think once we figure out what we want to do, we can pick their brain about approach. And then once we declare it a ballot issue, then we have to step back. I believe I have that right. You tell me if I'm wrong.
If I could address just a couple of things you said, because you're absolutely right. And starting with Option's point about, you know, a committee, that is, in speaking to the consultants, that is a very common approach to these things. And they, you know, they're not on one side or the other, but their point was basically this: the question, are you really asking the committee or not, right? Because I served on the Arapahoe County Budget Committee, and from my experience, they weren't really asking us what we thought. They had already come to the conclusion of what they felt needed to be done, and they were trying to get a group of citizens on board to be, you know, to spread forth the message. So, and I think it's a really fair question, and it kind of goes to Randy's point about, you know, are we all there yet, and are we all in that same place? You know, they said, if you get a citizens committee together, the pro and con of that is that you kind of have to go with what the citizens committee tells you. And if the citizens committee comes back and tells you something you don't want to hear, how are we collectively as a body going to respond to that? So that's kind of just a consideration. And these are the kinds of issues that a consultant would help us work out. Have we already decided, and therefore having a citizens committee would not be very genuine, and it would be pretty transparent that it's just a manipulative thing? Or are we really asking the question of our citizens committee and ready to act on their counsel? And then in terms of, Randy, your point about us being involved and then turning it over, we can't be involved as a city and as a city council, and the city staff can't be working on things. But it was very clear in talking to all three of those consultants that in their experience in every other place that they've done this, you know, they were talking like, oh, we could set up individual meetings with key community members and all the council members. And I was sitting there thinking that is a lot more campaigning than anyone in our city has ever done. Any of us here has really ever done. That would be the expectation. Hiring a consultant doesn't mean that you're hiring somebody to go do it for you. They would expect us as individual citizens to be, if it got that far, and there actually was a ballot initiative, they would expect us to be pounding the pavement as individual citizens. And I think that is something, you know, I'll be honest, I'll be out in 2022. I've knocked on every door in Cherry Hills Village at least 3 times. I'll just be very frank with all of you and set the expectation that I'm not sure I'm going to be the person knocking on all the doors again. And that's just being honest. So I think each of us has to ask ourselves what we would really be willing to commit to that to get it across the finish line. Because if the answer is, no, I don't really, like, it's not me, it's got to be somebody else, then, and this was where I was headed with, would the money be wasted if we got down the path and everybody on council was like, you know what, I just don't have the bandwidth to do that right now, either my personal life or whatever. And I ultimately came to the conclusion that I don't think it would be. I think it would be very beneficial to understand how our community at large feels about these issues.
Katie, let me address one thing for Randy. Randy, I know you've done a lot of work on the budget. Now, we're talking really about 3 issues. Now, one of the things the consultants can help us with, do we go to the ballot with 1, 2, or 3, or none? And I think that's where the education process and the value of bringing a consultant on now becomes very important. Now, when they did the withdrawal from South Suburban, they hired a consultant from day 1, and there was no way that issue was going to pass without the input of the consultant, and they took the lead on that. Now, again, like Katie said, some of us are going to have to get involved individually, not as city council members or the city, to get involved if we get to that path. But we don't know if we can get to that path yet, or what that path is going to be, whether it's going to be 1, 2, or 3, or all of them that we talked about as potential ballot issues. So we think it's critical that we get somebody on board now. The education process, I think, is very important for all of us as individuals to learn about this process and to be done properly. There's even a question potentially, we don't know, I know Kathy's looked into that, as to whether we do need to do something on the sales tax. So there's all kinds of issues, and I think it's critical right now that we don't go with a citizens committee, but we do go with a consultant that can advise us as a city council and a city how to proceed down the road.
Because, you know, we as a group might say, we think option B is the best and it would solve all our problems. But doing some research in the community proves that option B doesn't have a snowball's chance. But option A and C, you know, so I think that's where all of this, you know, they're all interlocking parts, and that's what we need to figure out.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I just would like to be personally at a level of commitment where to the solution where I could feel comfortable knocking on some doors. I admit I'm not going to be knocking on a ton of them just because I don't have quite the, but HOA meetings, other things like that, certainly I could reach a fair number of people, and we'll be happy to do that. And, you know, proximity, walks in the neighborhood, I can hit a number of people as well.
No, but
So-
that's totally fair that, you know, if you're, and that is, we all have to be able to get there. And I would agree with you. I'm not quite totally there yet. But we'll have to get to a place where either you can get there and we can all get there and support it, or we can't.
And I might change my mind if the consultant came back and said exactly as you said, there's no way in hell this is going to pass, but we could do this instead. Okay. You know, I'm not stuck. I just want to be committed.
All right.
Yeah.
We are still on member reports. Any other, I started with Councilor Blum. Any other reports? Councilor Sheldon?
Yeah, just a brief one. Regarding the American Rescue Act and the $1.4 million that's currently estimated to be allocated to the village, broken up into 2 annual slugs. As far as the infrastructure and when we hear from Treasury what that is that going to be eligible for, I just would throw out a couple of ideas that may fall under the guise of infrastructure. Power line burying could theoretically be infrastructure, not theoretically, it is. Cell phone coverage. You know, we've always all talked about how we have such bad coverage, and I know that Al's working on some stuff with some of that, but if money is one of the problems with getting these carriers to want to come plant their flag here because there's just not enough critical mass of density, maybe we augment the cell phone carriers with some money.
That's exactly
anyway, that was it. My only other comment, I don't know if you guys saw it, but the April 1st edition of The Villager, the cover article was absolutely priceless. If you have not seen it yet, go online or go get your Villager and read the cover that Bob Sweeney did. It is outstanding. And I have had so many funny conversations with people in the office and in my home and friends and family, and it's just outstanding. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a big April Fool's spoof, and it's just outstanding.
I confess it took me to about the second paragraph where I was like, this can't be real.
I read the title,
and I was like, what?
I read the title, and I knew instantly it was an April Fool's deal when it said that the largest amusement park in the world is going into Greenwood Village. Yeah. Just like, there's no way. Anyway, read it if you get a chance. That's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Sheldon. And I do, and Dan, I think you're spot on. If we can shoehorn broadband into our cellular, that would be awesome. So we really are waiting to see what these guidelines, Treasury guidelines, are going to say. That's obviously great. That could be a great help to us. Councilor Gallagher.
Yeah, just one comment and just to share some information. I received an email from a resident who was talking about our Comcast franchise agreement, and what I learned and what was confirmed by Ken Feldman was that whatever money our city receives from Comcast, Comcast is able to directly bill back dollar for dollar to their subscribers. So we give them we charge them franchise fees, they pay us, and they turn around and bill their customers for that. I didn't understand that, and I'm just passing it on in case it's news to you.
Thanks.
That's it.
Councilor or Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Nothing more to report.
Councilor Wheel.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot going on in DRCOG, but not a lot of it that really impacts us. There's a fair amount of money that is cascading down as a result of infrastructure and various financial aid programs to states and cities. So hopefully we'll be in line. The 30-day hearing period for the MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan is closed. And again, that doesn't have a terrific impact on us, but that's moving along, and they should have a plan in the not too distant future. Issues going on about aging and safer streets, and executive director report was DRCOG set up a big vaccination event with SCL, and they provided rides for seniors and all the rest of it. So they're trying to pitch in a little bit, which is great. I don't know if there's interest, but I would be happy to send this email that I received from, the best one was from a constituent that had the letter from George Lance written to Jeff Bridges and Representative Meg Froelich. I know we're a little hesitant to take stands on political issues except through some of the organizations, but it was kind of an interesting letter, and I think it's worth sharing. So if you don't mind, I'll send that out. That's all I have.
Send that to us, and then that way we can send it out, and it's.
Oh, sure. Happy to do that. It'll save me some time.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Chris.
Councilor Safavi, any report?
Just maybe I guess, Russell, you were maybe on the text that was sent out about the Bobcat, or no? Maybe
I did see, I saw the Bobcat on.
So there were, I got a text from one of the neighbors, or not neighbors, somebody in the community, that they showed us this video that there is this relatively large Bobcat, in their courtyard, sort of. And this was more in the afternoon. It seems like it was dim. Another neighbor sent a picture of a Bobcat. I don't know if it's the same Bobcat or a different one. Hopefully it's the same one, during the morning time. And then a third neighbor responded that, yep, I've seen a Bobcat coming around. I've called the animal control. So I don't know if we're dealing with one Bobcat that likes to roam around and knock on the doors, or we have 3 separate Bobcats. But
and there's a lot of sightings
case,
over here too. There have been about 4 or 5 in Mansfield Heights as well. So
yeah. So anyway, and so there's more apparently. So in any case, good for the Bobcats. But I think some of the neighbors with the small dogs and as well as they have some children that run around play in the yard, they're a little bit worried. And I don't know if Chief, have you got any calls, or city manager, did you guys get calls? What's going on? If you can inform us on that.
So animal control has received a couple of calls. I know that some of the neighbors have enlisted the assistance of a wildlife manager also. And we're making sure that he stays informed about what's going on. And we have had no reports of any damage yet with regard to household pets or livestock. So we are aware of it. And I know John Newhouse is keeping a good eye on it. And, we'll make sure that, if we get any more information, we'll make sure that it's posted.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
I know Bobcats like to eat rabbits, so that's maybe why they're here, because there's so many rabbits. But the other thing was wild turkeys. Did everybody see the report of wild turkeys in Inglewood, which was incredible? Several of them, just walking down the street. Several pictures of them in Inglewood. So they're for a species. When I was in elementary school, they were endangered species. Now we've got them back in spades. So. That's good news too. City manager, any report?
Yeah, I actually do have multiple things. I will try and go somewhat quickly because I know that it's getting late. First of all, as a follow-up to an earlier conversation, Councilor Safavi, interestingly enough, tomorrow, Arapahoe County is kicking off a homeless coordinating committee. Homelessness is one of those issues that knows no boundaries. It's like air pollution, right? And they're trying to become more regional in nature and dealing with that. Obviously, it's really early in that process, so stay tuned. But I think there is a real acknowledgement that homelessness in the region is a real issue right now, and how to deal with that in a effective and yet humane way is a riddle that a lot of folks are struggling with right now. But just be aware that there are efforts underway. I do have a couple of COVID topics real quick. As council may have heard, the dial is going away likely on the 16th. However, you should be aware there's a couple of tri-county efforts or emergency declarations that are in effect that may be different than the statewide messages that you are hearing. One, the mask, there's going to be a specific tri-county mask order that's going to be different than Governor Polis's order. It's going to be a slightly more restrictive on indoor mask wearing in public. Second, all of the health departments in the metro area, they're attempting to get all the health departments in the metro area to all extend the dial by 1 more month. We should have news about this on this Friday as to whether or not Tri-County is going to be doing that. So stay tuned for that. It does make messaging really challenging in that the state's giving one set of messages and the metro area on this one issue is giving different messages, and then Tri-County on another issue is giving it, so it can be challenging. We will try and include the best information we can in the Friday update on that topic. That does relate to, the vaccine clinic that the city hosted last Thursday. Great job by Catherine on helping put that together. It has a lot of benefits. It helps provide a lot more safety for our employees and eventually for residents who are going to be interacting with our employees. It also is a benefit to us because it provides some certainty for reopening City Hall. So we are going to be reopening City Hall to the public, opening the doors on May 17th, because our second date for the second clinic is the 29th. And if we do the 2-week curing period after that, May 17th will be when we open up City Hall again. That will likely then mean that we will start having discussions about community events and also allowing for community organizations to start meeting in City Hall after that date as well. There's HOAs and other local government agencies that use City Hall. Those will all start becoming eligible as well. So it's all very exciting. It does start to beg the question about city council meetings themselves and what city council would like to start doing with, as we get more into the summer and as the vaccines increase and as the dial, gets extended for a month, but still is likely going away. At what point does city council want to think about in-person or a hybrid model or et cetera? I'm not going to put you on the spot tonight, but I guess I'm going to put you on the spot very soon. So you might just start thinking about that and what your preferences are there. Be aware also that when we do get to that point, we start deciding that has the opportunity to open up other boards and commission meetings for in-person meetings as well. So heads up there. I think that is the only updates I had. I was able to get to those pretty quickly.
Chris, I have a question about that. Obviously, the dial and the mask wearing and all of that is all enabled by state of emergency declarations.
Right.
Do we have any thought of if, when, if ever, those are going to go away?
Well, it's my understanding that the state of emergency, so the Tri-County amendments to the state orders are emergency declarations in their own right. And so, I think that there will have to be some proactive steps taken. There'll have to be votes by the board and, executive decisions by Governor Polis to end those executive orders, to make them in essence go away.
Well, don't they run out eventually?
Well, yes. It's my
don't they actually have to take votes to extend them?
Yes, they do. That is correct. That's the best way of putting it. Yes.
Okay.
But they're taking positive steps to make that happen.
Yes. Okay. But just the dial going away is not the same as the emergency declaration being rescinded.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
The governor is really clear that he's going to extend he wants to extend the emergency authorizations even when this, it's a 30-day thing. They have to continue.
Yeah, I'm sure he wants
so
to.
It's a series of temporary 12 temporary emergencies. He's going to continue to do that because there are other, even when the dial goes away, he's going to continue to do that. But when we have to remember, we have our own emergency.
Correct.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
We really need to take a look at that and see what happens with that. I think that might be contingent on the governor's statement as well.
Can you really just do that indefinitely?
As long as the General Assembly doesn't shut you down. That's in Wisconsin, and that's what
isn't going to happen. So okay.
Not going to happen. there's talk about amending that. That's a statute. There's talk about amending that, giving the General Assembly back power to actually intervene more and to require them to vote on extending it after a certain period. So, but that's from the Republican minority.
Yeah. Well, because not to imply that that's what's happening here, but it's illuminating, I think, a really potentially dangerous situation where you can just declare an emergency and become a dictator for as long as you want, and nobody can do anything about it.
As long as you have the votes in the General Assembly, you can do that, apparently. All right, any other?
Yeah, I think staff might have a couple of updates as well. So, Chief, do you have any?
Yes, just really quickly, with regard to the foundation, I've had several conversations with Mark Griffin, and he will be attending virtually the April 20th meeting. He's currently in Indiana, but he's going to make sure that that happens. So that will be happening. And then just with regard to House Bill 62, I was on a Zoom call with several chiefs, with Senator Bridges. I think we reported that. And Dustin Varney over at Chief Varney over at Greenwood Village did an amazing job with giving some points to the senator, and then he took the initiative to author the letter that obviously of all the things that we had talked about, and that's the letter that you all saw. So I have to tell you, I appreciate the support with that, because I struggle mightily with how 62 is written. So that's all I had. I just wanted to say thank you.
Jay?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Couple quick updates. If your cell phone service has been not good for the last couple days, XL bored right through one of the main cable lines for Crown Castle on our undergrounding project. From what I hear, it knocked out about 130 small cell towers in the South Metro area. So if you see those crews out there, they will be working 24/7 to get all of those cables fixed and back up as soon as possible. And with all of the COVID easements being talked about, we've been talking about special events. We are planning on having the spring cleanup. It will be a scaled back version. We will not be doing trash pickup this year. We will be accepting electronics, paint, and shredding. On May 22nd, we're going to do it at City Hall. It'll be a drive-through event, so you won't even have to get out of your car. We can get everything out of there for you and take care of it. And we'll continue looking at the other special events and as the rules and regulations come out as to what we can do. That's all I have.
Jessica?
Good evening. Just briefly, since the mayor mentioned in his report with the American Rescue Plan, two things that the city manager Kramer and I discussed were undergrounding utilities and cell phone coverage. So Councilor Sheldon, sounds like we're on the same page with that. We're just waiting to receive the guidance from Treasury. So the funding will be released on May 11th, and Treasury is hoping to have that guidance out before then. So as soon as we get that, we'll pass that along to City Council and then start planning from there.
And follow up to that, Councilor Wheel, Councilor Blum, Mayor Stewart, for our Zayo call that got rescheduled or is in the process of getting rescheduled, that actually works out okay, because by the time we have that rescheduled meeting, we should have much more guidance from Treasury to know early indications are broadband is going to be an allowable expense. So I think it may be in our best interest to have that rescheduled. So it's actually quite all right that they're wanting to hold off.
Very good. Any other reports from staff? Or if not, city attorney?
So nothing huge to report. I continue to review contracts from A to V. That would be appraisal services to vaccination clinics and everything in between. The hydra of these big relief acts, continues to generate work for attorneys as well. I've interpreted COBRA subsidy, subsets of that law, continue to help with this application of the statewide Healthy Families Workplace Rescue Act, working with the auditor on the year-end audit, advising and reviewing land use applications. We're looking at some code changes potentially in the land use realm. That's just at the very beginning stages. And the big news really is soon I will be presenting to you an ordinance for consideration on how to handle campaign finance violations at the local level. You may recall from back in the last legislative session, well, first the Secretary of State refused by rule to hear campaign finance violations at the local level, and that was codified into state law. And so we need to have a process in place and would rather do it sooner than later, so that you do have a process if such a complaint ever does come in the door. So that'll be coming before you soon. That's it.
And I'd add too, our city attorney is negotiating with Comcast and the Comcast contract and some issues there that, as she mentioned last meeting, we'll be bringing forward to council for discussion too. Probably in an executive session at some point.
Is that your thinking at this point, Mayor?
Yeah, I think so. We'll see how it goes with your negotiations and see what happens, but we may.
Okay, all right. Then we're on the same page. All right, thank you. I see Mr. Kramer nodding too. Okay.
Yeah, I thought you were saying before we send it to Comcast. You're talking about when we hear back from them.
After.
That makes perfect sense.
Makes sense. Okay, yeah.
All right. Any other comments? If not, everybody have a terrific week and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Good night.